I thank the member for Forrest. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Greenway.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak on the Copyright Amendment Online Infringement Bill 2015 and also to support the amendment circulated by the Shadow Attorney-General. I particularly think that the substance of the amendment that's been moved actually goes to the heart of many of the submissions that were made to the Senate inquiry into the bill and address factors that go to behaviour and breaches of copyright in the first place that I think are useful to discuss in this context. Make no mistake, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a vexed area. It's vexed in terms of a legal perspective, but also in a policy perspective. There's no question about that. But in making some observations on the bill, I want to touch on its rationale, on Labor's approach, on the importance of protecting consumers, and some concerns that my constituents have raised with me and some of the misconstructions surrounding this bill, but also to address what I might describe as push factors for online piracy in the first place. And last night, when I was giving some comments on the report by the REP's Infrastructure and Communications Standing Committee into Section 313 of the Telecommunications Act, I foreshadowed that one thing that often seems to be missing from debates around these areas of site blocking and copyright is a focus on consumers. But I do think it's really important to bring it back precisely to that point. One article that has stuck in my mind for a couple of years is one by Zach Whitaker from the 10th of January 2011, and it was published, I believe, on ZDNet since. And it's headed, "Why Young People Pirate, brackets, it's not just about money." And it asks a very valid question and goes to the whole issue of why do people pirate, and in particular young people. So this was written from a UK perspective, but I think the principles remain the same. And this article asks the questions: is it just a lack of available regional content, as between the US and Europe? Is it just all about the money? Is it all about the money? And he makes some statements that I think are valid even more than 4 years later in the context of this debate. It would be a lie to say that money was not a significant factor for young people and students alike. But to collate and understand why young people pirate boils down to one easy summarising statement. The legal options are not as readily available, simple enough, nor consistent enough to access. It really is as simple as that. I believe it is important to look at this in the context of Australia today, and one aspect that is useful in this regard is a survey that was published by Choice in December last year, and it's about the fact that their piracy survey shows that most pirates are actually willing to pay for content. They're actually willing to pay for it. It notes 1/3 of Australians have illegally accessed online content. But some of the key survey findings: 50% of pirates said that their main reason for pirating was price, and 41% said it was because they wanted specific content sooner than available in Australia. So that's a staggering 91% pirating on the basis, their rationale for pirating as a main reason is either price or availability. Now, surely this is an area, I'm not proposing that, and I think it would be absurd to propose that the law should and can address these areas. But the fact, again, the Choice survey shows most consumers, 55%, try to use legal sources first before searching out pirated copies of content, really does indicate that there is an issue in the market here. And on that point, I believe that it is important for the government to pick up the recommendations made in the report from July 2013, At What Cost? IT Pricing and the Australia Tax, which had what I believe to be a very sensible list of recommendations that are worth exploring. And just to go to one of them, recommendation number 6, It doesn't propose a legislative change, but it proposes that the government investigate options to educate Australian consumers and businesses on matters such as the extent to which they may circumvent geo-blocking mechanisms in order to access cheaper, legitimate goods, the tools and techniques which they may use to do so, and the way in which their rights under the Australian consumer law may be affected, should they choose to do so. I want to look at some of the submissions that were made to the Senate committee. There were 49 submissions in all, and when you look at the list of submitters, these are all very knowledgeable groups in their own areas. But I want to take a sample because I think although some of these are contrary to one another, they do illustrate the point that I've been making about access to content in an affordable and timely manner being a key issue in circumventing breaches. And like many members, I received a large number of emails which were accessed through the Choice website. So I want to acknowledge the constituents who went to the trouble to actually look this up and send me an email on this, often with additional comments. And of course, this is a request to vote against this bill. But there is a statement: if you won't vote against the bill, then I ask you to make sure that it won't accidentally capture legitimate websites, including VPNs. And it urges me to have a look at the Choice submission that was made to the inquiry. And I want, again, those constituents to know that I have duly done that. And I think it was very useful because, as even pointed out in its introduction in the Choice submission, Choice believes that the bill is unlikely to reduce access to sites facilitating online infringement and even less likely to reduce the rates of online infringement. But then they make, even if you disagree with that point, make a point which, again, I think is quite valid, and I go back to the 2011 article that I previously quoted on. Choice's research has consistently shown that consumers in Australia pay more for identical digital products than consumers in comparable markets such as the USA or United Kingdom. Providing Australians with better access to digital content at a comparatively reasonable price will give consumers a greater incentive and opportunity to access content legitimately. So, and indeed, it goes to the very issue of the IT pricing inquiry that I mentioned. We think it's unfortunate that this approach, that is this bill, favours a heavy-handed legislative approach ahead of market-based reforms such as those recommended by the House of Representatives' inquiry into IT pricing and also the recent final report of the federal government's competition policy review. And again, I make the point, timely and affordable content is paramount in this case. Looking to different submission and looking at that of Screen Producers Australia, and I would acknowledge Screen Producers Australia who have been hosting a number of events in Parliament House over the last few days. The Screen, as I know is the case of the member for Melbourne Ports and the member for Moreton, is one of my great loves. I was previously the chair of Screen New South Wales, and it was a position which I not only enjoyed immensely, but it taught me a great deal about the way in which our creative industries support people in my electorate, an electorate that you wouldn't normally consider one to be one that benefits from these industries. But everything from the catering to the logistics and to the minds of the people who are creating content that certainly should be protected. So I want to acknowledge the Screen Producers Australia. And their submission notes that, as representatives of intellectual property creators, Screen Producers Australia strongly supports initiatives that will reduce the incidence of online copyright infringement, and we offer in-principle support to the proposed amendments in this bill. SPA believes that these amendments, along with a copyright notice scheme, will form an important part of a holistic strategy, one that includes public education, promotion of legal alternatives, and a pathway to stronger enforcement. It is the view of many rights holder groups that similar site blocking measures have been adopted overseas and have had a positive impact. And indeed, I take particular note of their point on it being a holistic strategy. I think not only through legislative means such as this, but also through other means of ensuring that Australians have access to timely and affordable content will go a long way towards that. And Screen Producers Australia refers some of its substantive comments to the Australian Copyright Council, a very reputable organisation founded in 1968, and they have raised, whilst they say they support the government's strategy to address online copyright infringement, there are a number of operational features of the bill that they wanted to raise. One of them that stands out is the definition of online location. And they point out that infringing websites can indeed pop up at different domain names, and some of the other submissions I've looked at raise this very issue as well. They point out that the term online location may be broad enough for an injunction to cover replicas of the same infringing website popping up at different domains. And I think they make a very valid point that settling this is crucial for the legislation to be effective. So how this is administered in practice will certainly be extremely important. You turn to a submission like Electronic Frontier Foundation, taking an intensely different view. But again, they do point out the importance of giving consumers timely and comparatively affordable access to content. And I quote, EFF believes that censoring content from the internet through blocking or filtering is never the best approach to take in managing illegal behaviour online, and that it is always much better to address such behaviour at its source. So again, I believe that they here are going to the issue of behaviour. Why are people pirating? And again, it goes back to those very issues that I mentioned. In the time left to me, I do want to point out the fact that the government has not yet responded to the ALRC report, and in July last year, the Attorney-General and the Minister for Communications released a discussion paper on online copyright infringement, and that included a number of proposals. And the bill that we're debating takes up the second proposal, which looks at introducing mechanisms for blocking infringing sites. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, my understanding from the research I've seen is that Australia unfortunately has a high level of piracy by international standards, and it does have an economic impact. It does have an impact on jobs, it does have an impact on the sector, and the effects flow on to many other areas of the sector. And we on this side of the House, we support reasonable measures to discourage privacy. We believe that action is needed to reduce current levels of online privacy, and the enforcement of copyright law is vital to our creative industries. So we do support this bill, which, as the Shadow Attorney-General has pointed out, is modest. It is common sense, a common sense measure. It is intended to disrupt foreign websites operating as havens for piracy and to discourage copyright infringement by Australian consumers. And just to quote the Shadow Minister for Communications and the Shadow Attorney-General last year, they made it clear that action is needed both to deter privacy and to encourage access to legitimate content. We made it clear that there are concerns regarding the effectiveness of site blocking when dealing with online piracy, and we noted that pirated content is likely to reappear as quickly as it can be taken down. And as I've said, this bill will certainly not completely solve the problem of piracy in Australia, but it is appropriate to take action against websites which flagrantly and intentionally flout the copyright law. This bill is directed at foreign websites whose primary purpose is to infringe copyright or facilitate the infringement of copyright. And disrupting this kind of website, it is hoped, will discourage at least some copyright infringement in Australia. I note the Shadow Attorney-General in his remarks this evening did make comments on what the bill does not do, and I think it is important to highlight where this bill draws a line. This bill does not provide for a sort of internet filter. It provides a judicial remedy on a case-by-case basis for conduct which flouts existing Australian law. The requirements of the bill are strict, and we can expect federal court judges to exercise the site-blocking power cautiously and with restraint. And I am conscious, as I indicated from a number of constituents who contacted me, and according to that Choice website, I think over 5,000 such emails were sent to various members of parliament around Australia. I am conscious that some members of the community and my own constituency are concerned that the bill might allow the blocking of virtual private networks or VPNs, and we have made sure that this is not the case. Our senators on the Senate committee investigated this matter and are satisfied that the bill's terms would not extend to blocking VPN usage. However, we have asked the government, and I think it's a reasonable request, and my understanding from the Attorney-General is that it has been agreed to, ask the government to put this matter beyond doubt by amending the explanatory memorandum to clarify this. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think it is important that while we do have this bill, we need to make sure that timely and comparatively affordable content is made available to all Australians.
I thank the honourable member for Green.